The crisp white envelope stuck aggressively to the freshly painted front door. With what looked like industrial-strength tape felt like a personal insult. Chloe Vance peeled it off carefully, leaving behind a sticky residue that mirrored the unpleasant feeling curdling in her stomach. Inside the familiar, overly ornate letterhead of the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association preceded the impersonal typed words, "Fifth Notice, Non-Compliant Architectural Modification." Her fingers tightened around the thick paper. 5 notices in less than a month, all aimed at the one thing that made her sister's life manageable right now. The wheelchair ramp. Chloe glanced through the living room window towards the makeshift office set up near the fireplace. Her older sister, Governor Eleanor Ellie Vance, sat bathed in the cool glow of a laptop screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. Even from this distance, Chloe could see the faint lines of exhaustion etching deeper around Ellie's eyes. 6 months ago, a multi-car pileup during a sudden blizzard had turned Ellie's world upside down, leaving the newly inaugurated governor grappling with recovery alongside the immense pressures of her office. The sleek, unobtrusive ramp installed by certified contractors and matching the house trim perfectly wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity for Ellie to maintain a semblance of independence and continue her demanding work from home during the initial, most challenging phase of her rehabilitation. Yet to Victoria Sterling, the HOA president, it was apparently an eyesore, demanding immediate removal. "Another love letter?" Ellie asked, her voice carrying a hint of weariness she tried hard to conceal. She'd wheeled herself quietly into the hallway, her electric wheelchair humming softly on the hardwood floors. Chloe forced a smile, crumbling the notice in her fist. "You could say that. Apparently our ramp continues to offend Mrs. Sterling's delicate sensibilities regarding community aesthetics." She tossed the crumpled paper onto the growing pile on the entryway table. "Doesn't she have anything better to do?" It was a rhetorical question. From Chloe's observation post at the front window, over the past weeks, Victoria Sterling always seemed to be doing something related to HOA enforcement. She'd seen her, a woman in her late 50s, always impeccably dressed in sharp blazers and tailored slacks, blonde hair perfectly coiffed, strolling the sidewalks with a clipboard, measuring lawn heights with a critical eye, peering intently at mailbox designs, even adjusting a neighbor's slightly crooked decorative flag. Oakhaven Estates was beautiful, yes, but under Victoria's reign it felt less like a community and more like a meticulously curated, slightly sterile exhibit. Every lawn was identical, every flower bed suspiciously uniform. It was the Sterling standard, as some neighbors whispered, and deviation wasn't tolerated. Ellie sighed, wheeling closer. "We followed every rule, Chloe. Got the permits, used the approved paint color." "I know," Chloe interrupted gently, placing a hand on her sister's shoulder. "It's not about the rules, Ellie, not the real ones. It's about her." She looked back out the window, half expecting to see Victoria lurking nearby. The feeling of being constantly watched, judged by their powerful, unreasonable neighbor, was becoming suffocating. This relentless focus on the ramp felt personal, targeted, and Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria Sterling, a woman obsessed with control, wouldn't simply stop at sending notices. The quiet hostility simmering beneath the surface of Oakhaven Estates felt poised to boil over. The harassment escalated with unnerving speed. One morning just after dawn, Chloe was jolted awake by the distinct click-click-click of a camera shutter outside. Peeking through the blinds, she saw Victoria Sterling standing brazenly on the edge of their lawn, phone held high, meticulously photographing the ramp from multiple angles. Victoria's posture was rigid, her expression one of intense concentration, as if documenting evidence for a high-profile crime scene rather than observing a simple accessibility structure. Chloe felt a surge of anger mixed with a cold knot of anxiety. This wasn't just about aesthetics anymore. This felt like targeted intimidation. That was the turning point. Chloe grabbed her own phone, snapping a few quick pictures of Victoria in the act before the HOA president retreated down the sidewalk, her brisk walk radiating smug satisfaction. Enough was enough. Later that day, Chloe bought a dedicated notebook and started documenting everything: the date and time of the 5th notice, the early morning photography session, even noting the passive-aggressive flyer Victoria had tucked under their welcome mat the previous afternoon. A generic reminder about maintaining uncluttered frontages, clearly aimed at the ramp. Each entry was logged with meticulous detail. She saved the photos, backed up the recordings from her phone. A grim feeling settled over her. This meticulous record-keeping, this journey of discovery into Victoria Sterling's tactics felt less like a precaution and more like preparation for a battle she desperately wished they didn't have to fight. "We need to send a formal response to these latest notices," Ellie said that evening, rubbing her temples as she reviewed state budget projections on her tablet. The strain of balancing her recovery, her gubernatorial duties, and this neighborhood vendetta was showing. "Outline the permits again, reference the city ordinance, reiterate our compliance." Ellie, a formal response isn't going to stop her, Chloe argued, gesturing towards her growing notebook. "She took pictures this morning like she was building a federal case. She knows we have the permits, she doesn't care." "Maybe not," Ellie conceded, her voice tight, "but we have to proceed correctly. We follow the established procedures. I can't just make a call. Chloe, not for this, especially not with the legislative session starting next week." She sighed, the weight of her office palpable in the quiet room. "We have to build our own official record," Chloe understood, or tried to. Ellie's position demanded an adherence to process and avoidance of even the appearance of impropriety. But watching Victoria operate felt like watching someone who weaponized process-twisting rules to fit her own agenda. The latest HOA email announced a mandatory Architectural Review Committee emergency meeting, scheduled for Tuesday morning, precisely when Ellie had her crucial physical therapy appointment. It was too blatant to be a coincidence. Later, while taking out the recycling, Chloe noticed Mr. Abe Hassan, their elderly neighbor from across the street, carefully tending his rose bushes. He was a quiet man, a retired history professor whose wife had passed a few years back. As Victoria Sterling drove slowly past their house, her gaze lingering pointedly on the ramp before accelerating away, Chloe saw Mr. Hassan pause his pruning. He watched Victoria's car disappear, then let out a quiet, almost imperceptible sigh and slowly shook his head before turning back to his roses, his expression unreadable but carrying a distinct air of disapproval. He'd seen it too. Chloe wasn't imagining things. The lines were being drawn not just between their house and the HOA president, but potentially through the quiet fabric of the entire neighborhood, and Chloe's growing file of evidence felt like the only ammunition they had. The unease solidified into genuine fear a few days later. Chloe was watering the porch ferns, enjoying a rare moment of quiet afternoon sun, when she noticed Victoria Sterling standing near the end of her own immaculate driveway. Victoria wasn't alone. Two men in crisp dark suits stood with her, their backs partially to Chloe. They weren't familiar neighborhood faces. They looked like businessmen or perhaps lawyers. Victoria gestured emphatically towards Chloe and Ellie's house, her voice too low to carry clearly across the distance. One of the men nodded, making notes in a small leather-bound pad, while the other glanced around almost furtively. Something about the tableau felt intensely wrong, driven by a sudden sharp instinct. Chloe slipped back inside, grabbed her phone, and quietly circled around the back of her house, using the dense hedge bordering their property line for cover. Crouching low, she crept closer until she could just make out fragments of the conversation carried on the slight breeze. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she activated the audio recording app. "Absolutely non-compliant structure," Victoria was saying, her voice tight with authority. "We've followed protocol-issued warnings. Now it requires immediate remediation." One of the men, the one taking notes, murmured something about permits. "Irrelevant municipal paperwork," Victoria scoffed dismissively. "HOA covenants supersede, particularly regarding emergency aesthetic restoration. The integrity of the community's visual harmony is paramount." Emergency aesthetic restoration. The coded language sent a chill down Chloe's spine. It sounded like something crafted specifically to bypass normal procedures. "So, heavy equipment access will be required first thing," the other man stated, more a confirmation than a question. "Sunrise deployment to minimize disruption." "Precisely," Victoria confirmed, a triumphant edge to her voice. "Sunrise tomorrow. The board has already approved the emergency action based on the documentation provided." "The board? Or just you, Victoria?" Chloe wondered grimly, her thumb trembling slightly as she ensured the recording was active. These weren't just hidden secrets anymore. This was a confirmed plan. They were actually going to tear down the ramp. Chloe retreated as silently as she'd come. The recording safely saved, panic tightened its grip around her chest. She had to warn Ellie now. She found her sister deeply engrossed in a video conference call in the makeshift office. The screen filled with serious faces discussing complex budget charts. Ellie looked stressed, occasionally, pinching the bridge of her nose. Chloe waited impatiently by the doorway, shifting her weight until Ellie finally muted her microphone for a brief moment. "Ellie, I need to talk to you. It's urgent," Chloe whispered frantically. Ellie glanced up, her expression strained. "Chloe, I'm in the middle of the state budget crisis meeting. Can it wait?" "No, Victoria. She met with these men. They're planning to bring heavy equipment, a bulldozer maybe, tomorrow morning at sunrise. To remove the ramp. I heard them. Ellie, I recorded it." Ellie's eyes widened, slightly torn, between the immediate crisis unfolding on her screen and the escalating one Chloe described. "A bulldozer, Chloe, are you sure? That's illegal property destruction. She wouldn't dare." "She would," Chloe insisted, holding up her phone. "She called it emergency aesthetic restoration. She said the board approved it." Ellie looked back at her screen where someone was clearly waiting for her input, then back at Chloe's pale, frightened face. The pressure from both sides seemed immense. "Okay," she said, her voice low and tense. "Okay, let me finish this call. Give me 30 minutes. We'll figure it out. We'll call our lawyer. We handle this properly." She unmuted her microphone, her professional governor persona snapping back into place, leaving Chloe standing alone in the hallway, the horrifying recording burning a hole in her pocket. 30 minutes felt like an eternity. Sunrise tomorrow felt impossibly close. And handling it properly suddenly felt terrifyingly inadequate. The fear was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. The low rumble started just before sunrise, a deep vibration that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. It wasn't thunder, it was mechanical, ominous. Chloe's eyes snapped open in the pre-dawn gloom, her heart instantly seizing with dread. No, it can't be. She scrambled out of bed and rushed to the front window, peering through the slats of the blinds. There, parked squarely in their driveway, casting long, menacing shadows in the pale dawn light, sat a bright yellow bulldozer. Its metal blade gleamed dully. A silent, brutal threat. Standing beside it, silhouetted against the rising sun, was Victoria Sterling. She wore a sharp crimson blazer over dark trousers, her blonde hair immaculate even at this early hour. She held a sheaf of papers clutched like a shield, and was gesturing towards the ramp, giving instructions to two men in hard hats and orange vests who looked distinctly uncomfortable. The engine idled, a guttural growl that seemed to fill the quiet suburban street. Panic threatened to overwhelm Chloe, but the recording from yesterday galvanized her. Document everything. Grabbing her phone, she fumbled with the screen, her fingers slick with sudden sweat, ensuring it was recording video and audio. She took a deep, shaky breath and yanked open the front door, stepping out onto the dew-kissed lawn. The cool morning air hit her face, doing little to calm the frantic pounding in her chest. "Victoria, what is the meaning of this?" Chloe called out, her voice trembling slightly, but loud enough to carry over the engine's thrum. "Get that thing off our property." Victoria turned slowly, a perfectly composed, almost pitying smile fixed on her face. It was the same smile Chloe had seen at HOA meetings, condescending, utterly certain of its own righteousness. "Ah, Chloe, good you're awake," she chirped, as if discussing garden party arrangements. She walked towards Chloe, her expensive heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. "As per the emergency order issued by the Oakhaven Estates Architectural Review Committee, this structure," she gestured disdainfully towards the ramp, "is being removed due to significant violations of community guidelines. Section 423. She waved a paper from her stack. "The supposed emergency order. Emergency. What emergency?" Chloe shot back, holding up her phone clearly. "This ramp was approved by the city. We have all the permits right here." She quickly pulled up the digital copies on her phone screen, shoving it towards Victoria. "This is legal. What you're doing is illegal. Destruction of property." Victoria didn't even glance at the phone screen. She laughed, a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "The city's paperwork is irrelevant in this matter. Dear, HOA covenants established to protect our property. Values and community aesthetics take precedence within Oakhaven Estates. This is a private property dispute, and the HOA board has full authority." She tapped her sheaf of papers. "Notice was properly served via certified mail weeks ago. We have the signed receipt." Chloe stared dumbfounded. Certified mail? Signed receipt? They hadn't received or signed for anything like that. It had to be forged. This HOA conflict was escalating into outright fraud. Across the street, curtains twitched in several windows. Chloe saw Mr. Hassan standing on his porch, now wrapped in a bathrobe, his face etched with deep concern. He wasn't hiding. He was watching openly, his troubled gaze fixed on the unfolding drama. Other neighbors peeked out, drawn by the noise and the confrontation, their faces pale shapes in the dim morning light. The community tension was a palpable thing, thick and anxious in the air. "You can't do this, Victoria," Chloe pleaded, trying one last time, acutely aware of the workers shifting uneasily behind Victoria, listening to the exchange. "You are facing injustice head-on if you proceed." Victoria's smile tightened, her eyes turning cold as ice. She ignored Chloe completely, turning back towards the bulldozer operator. With a sharp, imperious nod, she gave the signal. The engine roared louder, and the massive yellow machine lurched forward, its heavy treads biting into the concrete edge of the driveway. The confrontation was over. The destruction was about to begin. "Stop! This is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act," Chloe yelled, her voice cracking with desperation, as the bulldozer idled menacingly close to the ramp's edge. "This ramp is essential access. Tearing it down isn't just property damage. It's a federal offense. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." Victoria Sterling barely flicked her gaze towards Chloe. The mention of the ADA of lawyers seemed only to harden her resolve. A cold, thin smile touched her lips. "Federal law doesn't dictate Oak Haven landscaping standards," she retorted icily, though her voice trembled almost imperceptibly, perhaps with adrenaline rather than fear. "This monstrosity is coming down. Now." She gave another sharp, decisive nod to the operator, turning her back on Chloe, as if dismissing a bothersome insect. This was it, the point of no return. Chloe kept her phone raised, the lens focused unwaveringly on the scene unfolding before her. Her hands were shaking violently now, but her grip on the device was iron tight. "Keep recording. Get everything." The thought pounded in her head like a drumbeat against the engine's roar. "Evidence, let the world see this." The bulldozer operator, his face grim, lowered the massive metal blade. It hovered scant inches above the meticulously painted gray concrete, the ramp that had taken weeks to plan, permit, and construct, the ramp that represented Ellie's hard-won fight for normalcy in the face of life-altering injury. Then, with a sickening lurch, the machine moved forward. The sound was horrific. A high-pitched, ear-splitting screech of metal, grinding against concrete, ripped through the morning air, followed by a brutal crunch as the blade bit into the ramp's edge. Chunks of concrete exploded outwards, skittering across the driveway like shrapnel. Dust billowed. The carefully constructed slope buckled under the immense pressure, groaning as reinforcing steel bars within twisted and snapped. Chloe flinched instinctively, but held her ground, kept the camera steady. Tears blurred her vision, hot and angry, but she blinked them away fiercely. Through the lens, she saw the raw, ugly destruction. The gouges in the surface, the widening cracks, the way the structure crumpled inward like a broken promise. It felt like a physical blow, a violation that went far beyond mere property. They were tearing down Ellie's access, her dignity piece by painful piece. Across the street, Mr. Hassan gasped audibly, his hand flying to his mouth. His face, usually so calm and scholarly, was pale with shock and outrage. He caught Chloe's eye across the ravaged lawn. His expression was one of shared horror, but also something else, a spark of grim determination. He gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze flicking down towards the pocket of his bathrobe, where the outline of a smartphone was visible. He was recording too, a tiny flicker of solidarity ignited within Chloe's despair. They weren't entirely alone in witnessing this outrageous act. The bulldozer reversed slightly, then lunged forward again, its blade slamming into the weakened structure with even greater force. More concrete shattered. The ramp, once a symbol of resilience, was rapidly becoming a pile of rubble. Victoria Sterling stood watching, arms crossed her crimson blazer, a stark slash of color against the gray destruction. Her face was impassive, revealing nothing but cold and yielding satisfaction. She had won this battle, or so she clearly believed. But Chloe, still filming through tear-blurred eyes, felt a different kind of resolve hardening within her. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was war, and Victoria Sterling had just made a terrible mistake. The shocking event was captured, the violation undeniable. Over the grinding destruction and the triumphant gleam in Victoria Sterling's eyes, a new sound began to penetrate the morning air. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail, easily dismissed as a distant ambulance, but it didn't fade. Instead, it grew steadily louder, closer, splitting into multiple insistent sirens weaving together in a rising chorus of urgency. Chloe lowered her phone slightly, frowning, trying to place the sound. The bulldozer operator hesitated, glancing towards Victoria for direction, his hands hovering over the controls. Victoria initially waved a dismissive hand, annoyed by the interruption to her orchestrated victory. "Ignore it!" she commanded, her voice sharp. Finish the job, but the sirens were impossible to ignore now. They were close, converging on their very street. Red and blue lights began flashing, reflecting off windows and manicured lawns, painting the quiet suburban scene in jarring strokes of official urgency. First one, state police cruiser whipped around the corner, then another, and a third blocking the entrance to the cul-de-sac. Immediately behind them, moving with disciplined precision, came a fleet of 5 identical, imposing black SUVs with tinted windows, the kind that whispered government authority. They pulled up swiftly along the curb, surrounding the chaotic scene in front of Chloe and Ellie's house. The smug certainty on Victoria Sterling's face finally faltered. Her perfectly composed smile froze, then evaporated completely, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She looked from the police cars to the black SUVs, her head swiveling as if trying to comprehend an impossible equation. Why were state police here? What were these government vehicles doing at a simple HOA enforcement action? This wasn't part of her plan. The bulldozer engine sputtered and died as the operator cut the power, the sudden silence amplifying the tension. Neighbors who had been watching from windows and doorways now stepped out onto their lawns, drawn by the escalating drama. Their faces a mixture of fear and bewildered curiosity. Even the construction workers backed away from the ravaged ramp, removing their hard hats, their expressions mirroring Victoria's dawning confusion. The entire street fell dead silent, save for the crackle of police radios and the thumping of Chloe's own heart. Time seemed to stretch each second thick with unspoken questions. Then the passenger door of the lead black SUV opened. A tall man in a crisp dark suit stepped out, an earpiece discreetly visible. He moved with an air of quiet professional competence, his eyes, sharp and assessing, scanning the entire scene. The bulldozer, the damaged ramp, Victoria clutching her papers, Chloe holding her phone, the gathering neighbors. He noted everything with unnerving calm. After his brief assessment, he walked deliberately to the rear passenger door of the same SUV and placed his hand firmly on the handle. A collective intake of breath seemed to pass through the small crowd of onlookers. Mr. Hassan stood rigid on his porch, his gaze fixed on that rear door. All eyes were locked on the imposing black vehicle. The power dynamics had shifted seismically in a matter of moments. Victoria Sterling, just seconds before the imperious commander of this small battlefield, now looked small, uncertain, her carefully constructed world, visibly unraveling around her. Whatever she had anticipated, whatever legal intervention she might have vaguely considered, it clearly wasn't this. The air crackled with suspense. Everything hinged on who was about to step out of that car. The rear door of the black SUV swung open smoothly. First, a polished black wheel emerged, followed by the rest of the electric wheelchair, expertly maneuvered onto the pavement by the security detail. Seated firmly in the chair, radiating an aura of unshakable calm, despite the wreckage marring her front lawn, was Governor Eleanor Vance. She wore a simple but sharp navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, the uniform of command adapted but undiminished by her current circumstances. Her gaze steady and piercing swept over the scene, the damaged ramp, the idling bulldozer, the anxious neighbors, and finally settled with laser focus on Victoria Sterling. A collective gasp went through the neighbors. Whispers erupted. "Is that the governor?" The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity for everyone present, most especially for Victoria. Her face, already pale, turned deathly white. The sheaf of HOA papers slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, scattering across the grass at her feet. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish out of water. Ellie wheeled herself forward, slowly stopping a few feet from the trembling HOA president. Her security detail fanned out slightly, creating a subtle but unmistakable perimeter. When Ellie spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tense silence with absolute clarity and authority. "Mrs. Sterling," Ellie began, her tone level, almost conversational, yet heavy with implication. "Perhaps you can enlighten me? Under precisely which state statute did you authorize the destruction of private property? Property, I might add, essential for compliance with federal accessibility laws?" Victoria stammered, utterly flustered. The HOA. The covenants. Emergency aesthetic. Ah, yes, the emergency aesthetic restoration, Ellie interrupted smoothly, nodding slightly, as if considering a flawed legal argument. And an interesting turn of phrase. However, I believe you will find that Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act has rather specific requirements regarding reasonable accommodations and access. Requirements that significantly outweigh subjective interpretations of visual harmony outlined in HOA bylaws. She paused, letting the weight of the federal law hang in the air. Furthermore, the willful destruction of such access carries significant legal consequences. As Ellie spoke, two more individuals emerged from one of the other black SUVs. Unlike the security detail, these two, a man and a woman both dressed in professional attire, carried briefcases and had the focused analytical air of investigators. They approached Victoria directly, their expressions serious. "Mrs. Victoria Sterling," the woman asked formally, though it was clearly a statement. "We are investigators with the State Attorney General's office. We need to ask you some questions regarding potential violations of state property laws and possible infringements under the state's Fair Housing and Disability Rights statutes." Victoria looked wildly from the investigators to Ellie, then to the impassive state troopers standing by their cruisers. She was trapped, cornered by a level of authority she had clearly never anticipated encountering in her meticulously controlled domain. This wasn't just an angry homeowner. This was the highest office in the state, backed by the full force of its legal apparatus. The abuse of power she had wielded so casually had boomeranged with devastating force. Just then, adding another layer to the unfolding chaos, the distinct silhouettes of news vans appeared at the end of the street, maneuvering past the police blockade. Camera crews began spilling out microphones, raised lenses, zooming in on the governor, the destroyed ramp, the bulldozer, and the utterly bewildered HOA president Chloe's live stream. The official presence or both had alerted the media. Victoria Sterling's petty neighborhood tyranny wasn't just facing legal repercussions. It was about to become a very public spectacle. Her carefully curated world hadn't just unraveled. It was imploding before her eyes, and soon before the entire state. With the state investigators beginning their questioning of a shell-shocked Victoria Sterling, governor, Eleanor Vance turned her attention to the rapidly assembling press corps, wheeling herself forward until she was positioned directly in front of the mangled remains of the ramp. Ellie didn't shy away from the cameras. Instead, she faced them head-on, her expression composed but resolute. The backdrop of destruction served as a powerful visual testament to her words. "This morning," Ellie began, her voice clear and carrying, despite the surrounding activity, "was not just about a disagreement over neighborhood rules. It was not just about a wheelchair ramp." She gestured towards the debris. "This is about something far more fundamental. It's about the right of every single citizen, regardless of physical ability, to live with dignity and access in their own homes and communities. It's about ensuring that power, whether in an HOA boardroom or anywhere else, is never used to bully, intimidate, or deny basic human rights." She didn't mention her title explicitly in relation to the conflict. She didn't need to. The context screamed it. She spoke not just as a homeowner violated, but as a leader addressing a systemic issue. She skillfully framed the narrative, elevating it from a personal HOA horror story to a matter of public principle and legal rights. The cameras clicked, microphones strained closer, capturing every word. Within hours, the story exploded. Chloe's shaky but damning phone footage, initially live-streamed, went viral across social media platforms and news sites under hashtags like Ramp Rage, HOA Overreach, and Governor Stands Ground. The visuals were stark: the gleaming bulldozer, the crumbling ramp, Victoria's initial arrogance dissolving into shock, and finally the arrival of the governor herself. It was a compelling, infuriating, and ultimately inspiring narrative that resonated deeply with viewers fed up with petty tyrannies and abuses of power. Somewhere in a bustling city office, miles away, Marcus Thorne, a charismatic housing rights lawyer known for his popular YouTube channel dissecting unfair housing practices, watched Chloe's footage with mounting outrage. He recognized the patterns instantly: the dubious bylaws, the targeted harassment, the blatant disregard for established law. This wasn't just compelling content. It was a clear-cut case of injustice he felt compelled to tackle. He tracked down Chloe's contact information through a mutual acquaintance who had seen the stream and sent her a direct message. Chloe Vance, Marcus Thorne, here saw the footage. Appalling. My firm specializes in exactly these kinds of HOA abuses and ADA violations. We'd like to offer our services pro bono. Let's talk. The arrival of potential high-profile legal representation added another significant weight to the scales tilting against Victoria. Meanwhile, the intense public scrutiny began dredging up the past. As Victoria Sterling's name and face saturated the news cycle, comments started appearing online beneath news articles and social media posts. Isn't that the same woman who ran the HOA in Silver Creek, forced the Millers to remove their kid's therapy swing? Another user posted a link to an old, obscure local news article detailing a lawsuit settled quietly years ago, involving questionable fines and liens under Victoria's presidency in a different town, a different HOA. The whispers started. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. Victoria Sterling's carefully constructed facade wasn't just cracking. It was being systematically dismantled by the ghosts of her past actions, brought to light by the explosive fallout of her latest transgression. Her history was rapidly catching up with her shocking behavior. The dam of silence in Oakhaven Estates finally broke. Inspired by Governor Vance's unwavering stand and emboldened by the relentless media spotlight, now fixed on their neighborhood residents, began to step out of the shadows cast by Victoria Sterling's long reign. The first, perhaps most crucial voice belonged to Mr. Abe Hassan. No longer content to be a silent, disapproving observer, he contacted Marcus Thorne's office, having seen the lawyer's public offer of assistance online. He arrived not just with his own testimony, but with a meticulously kept file folder. Inside were dated emails, photographs, and handwritten notes documenting his own frustrating battle with Victoria years prior over the precise, historically accurate shade of blue he'd painted his window shutters, a shade Victoria had arbitrarily deemed non-compliant and fined him heavily for until he capitulated and repainted them a standard HOA-approved beige. More importantly, his file contained copies of similar complaints he'd cautiously collected from two other neighbors who had since moved away, one involving exorbitant fines for a child's treehouse deemed structurally unsound by Victoria, despite city approval. Another concerning the forced removal of a small memorial garden for a deceased pet, Mr. Hassan's evidence painted a clear, undeniable picture. Victoria Sterling's harassment of the Vances wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of years of petty tyranny and targeted harassment against anyone who didn't conform to her rigid standards. Mr. Hassan's courageous act opened the floodgates. Soon others found their voices. Mrs. Gable from down the street tearfully recounted being forced to remove a small decorative garden gnome collection Victoria had labeled lawn clutter. The Peterson family shared emails demanding they cease using colorful sidewalk chalk on their own driveway, citing aesthetic violations. Story after story emerged small injustices individually, but collectively, forming a damning portrait of an abuse of authority that had stifled the community for years. Then came the anonymous leak. An encrypted email arrived simultaneously in the inboxes of Marcus Thorne and a prominent investigative reporter covering the story. Attached were scanned copies of Oakhaven Estates HOA financial records stretching back 3 years, along with internal board communications. The documents were explosive. They appeared to show significant HOA funds, collected through fines and dues, being diverted to pay for extensive renovations on Victoria Sterling's own home, vaguely disguised in the budget lines as common area landscaping enhancements and community infrastructure repairs. Furthermore, the emails suggested Victoria had assumed the presidency after the previous president moved away suddenly, without a proper election ever being held, simply declaring herself the interim, then permanent leader. The revelations ignited fresh outrage. The misuse of funds explained Victoria's obsessive focus on fines and compliance. It wasn't just about control, it was potentially about financing her lifestyle. The illegitimate power grab confirmed what many had suspected. Her authority was built on shaky foundations. Faced with mounting evidence of financial misconduct and legal impropriety, Victoria's few remaining allies on the HOA board scrambled to distance themselves. Within 24 hours, 3 key board members issued public statements announcing their immediate resignations, citing loss of confidence in leadership and concerns over financial transparency. Victoria Sterling was now utterly alone. her power base disintegrated, exposed, not just as a bully, but potentially as a fraud, her carefully constructed kingdom crumbling around her under the weight of the voices she had tried for so long to silence. The legal hammer fell swiftly and decisively. Armed with Chloe's initial recordings, Mr. Hassan's documented evidence, the testimony of numerous other residents, and the damning financial records, Marcus Thorne filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against Victoria Sterling personally and against the now rudderless Oakhaven Estates HOA entity. The suit cited multiple violations, including blatant breaches of the Americans with Disabilities Act, illegal destruction of private property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and breach of fiduciary duty related to the alleged misuse of HOA funds. Thorne made sure the filing was public, issuing a press release that detailed the scope of Victoria's alleged wrongdoings, ensuring the legal battle remained firmly in the public eye. Simultaneously, the State Attorney General's office moved forward with its own case. Bolstered by the evidence gathered by their investigators and the community testimonies, they announced formal charges against Victoria Sterling. These weren't just slaps on the wrist. They included felony charges for property destruction, multiple counts of fraud related to the financial irregularities, and potential civil rights violations stemming from the targeted harassment based on disability access. The full weight of the state's legal machinery was now directed squarely at the fallen HOA president. Faced with crippling lawsuits, potential criminal convictions, and relentless, overwhelmingly negative media coverage, Victoria Sterling retreated completely. The perfectly coiffed hair, the sharp blazers, the imperious demeanor, all vanished. Neighbors reported her curtains remained drawn day and night. Deliveries were left untouched on her doorstep. The meticulous lawn, once her pride and joy, began to look subtly neglected, a visible symbol of her shattered control. She became a recluse in her own glass house, the target of whispers and pointed fingers, whenever she was glimpsed fleetingly through a window. The public ostracization was as complete as her legal entanglement was dire. Her perfect facade hadn't just cracked, it had disintegrated, leaving behind only isolation and the looming specter of severe consequences. The Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association, as led by Victoria, effectively ceased to exist. With the president facing charges, key board members resigned, and homeowners refusing to cooperate or pay dues to the tainted entity, it lost all functional authority. Meetings were canceled indefinitely. Violation notices stopped appearing. The oppressive structure Victoria had built and maintained through intimidation and questionable practices simply dissolved, leaving a power vacuum and a neighborhood grappling with the wreckage, but also finally breathing freely. Victoria Sterling's reign of suburban terror was definitively over-ending, not with a bang, but with the quiet, ignominious collapse of her self-made, corrupt kingdom. In the wake of the Sterling collapse, the residents of Oakhaven Estates didn't just sweep away the wreckage. They began actively building something new. An interim homeowners committee was formed, quickly scheduling transparent elections for a new HOA board. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Abe Hassan, whose quiet courage had helped galvanize the neighborhood, was overwhelmingly elected alongside several other residents committed to fostering community rather than enforcing rigid conformity. Their first act was symbolic as yet powerful. They formally dissolved the complex and often arbitrarily applied system of fines, replacing it with initiatives focused on mutual support, like organizing volunteer gardening days for elderly residents and establishing a welcoming committee for new families. The focus shifted from punitive enforcement to community building. The construction company whose bulldozer had inflicted the damage, facing a public relations nightmare and potential inclusion in Marcus Thorne's lawsuit, moved quickly to make amends. Their CEO issued a formal public apology, acknowledging their failure to verify the legitimacy of the removal order. More tangibly, they offered to fully fund the reconstruction of Ellie's ramp, not just a repair, but a complete redesign. Collaborating with local artists, the ramp was rebuilt as a beautiful flowing structure painted with vibrant, abstract floral designs that complemented the house. Discreet, cool-toned lighting was integrated beneath the handrails, making it glow softly at night, transforming a point of contention into a unique piece of functional art. Furthermore, the company announced a new statewide initiative offering grants for accessibility modifications and funding several scholarships for students pursuing careers in disability rights law. Governor Eleanor Vance, meanwhile, channeled her personal experience into public policy. Drawing on the blatant legal loopholes and procedural ambiguities Victoria had exploited, she worked with her legislative team to draft comprehensive new legislation aimed at protecting homeowners from HOA overreach and ensuring robust enforcement of accessibility requirements. She introduced the Home Dignity Act during the next legislative session, a bill designed to provide clearer state-level protections, streamline complaint processes, and impose stricter penalties for HOAs found engaging in discriminatory or harassing practices. Her fight, born on her own front lawn, now aimed to safeguard countless others across the state. For Chloe, the entire ordeal had been a crucible, forging a new sense of purpose. Documenting Victoria's actions, navigating the fear and uncertainty, and witnessing the power of collective action had profoundly impacted her. When Marcus Thorne, impressed by her meticulous evidence gathering and composure under pressure, connected her with a leading nonprofit organization focused on fair housing and tenants' rights, Chloe didn't hesitate. She accepted a position as a case investigator and advocate, ready to use her skills and first-hand experience to help others navigate similar challenging situations. The seeds of positive change sown in the ugliness of the conflict were beginning to sprout, promising not just healing for Oak Haven estates, but potentially broader, lasting improvements inspired by their shared struggle. Months later, cheerful music drifted through the late afternoon air in Oak Haven estates. Laughter echoed between the houses, mingling with the sizzle of barbecue grills. Residents mingled on lawns and sidewalks, paper plates piled high, drinks in hand. The neighborhood block party organized by the new HOA committee was in full swing, centered naturally near the Vance house where Ellie's ramp glowed faintly as dusk began to settle its vibrant colors, a testament to resilience and beauty born from conflict. There was an undeniable lightness in the air, a palpable sense of ease and connection that had been absent for far too long. Under the Sterling standard, Chloe stood near the edge of the festivities nursing a lemonade, watching her sister chat easily with Mr. Hassan and Mrs. Gable. Ellie looked relaxed, truly happy, the lines of strain replaced by a genuine smile. Chloe felt a deep sense of peace settle over her, a quiet satisfaction that went beyond just winning a fight. Looking around, she saw neighbors talking animatedly, children chasing fireflies on the lawns, without fear of reprimand for noise or untidiness. It was still a beautiful neighborhood, but now it felt alive. Welcoming her journey of discovery hadn't just been about exposing wrongdoing. It had been about finding the path back to what a community should truly be. Her gaze drifted across the street to Victoria Sterling's former house. A moving truck was parked in the driveway, its ramp down nearly empty now. Earlier that day, the new family had arrived, a young couple with 2 small children, and as became apparent when an older woman using a walker carefully navigated her way out of their car, an elderly grandmother who would be living with them. Victoria's house, once a symbol of rigid control, now represented a new beginning. As the movers carried the last few boxes inside, Chloe noticed the husband talking with Mr. Hassan, gesturing towards the grandmother, who sat patiently on a fold-out chair near the front door. Mr. Hassan listened intently, then nodded. Within minutes, a quiet ripple of action spread through the block party attendees nearest the house. Mr. Hassan spoke briefly to a few neighbors, who then spoke to others. Tools appeared from garages, wrenches, levels, pieces of lumber someone had left over from a deck project, without fuss or fanfare. A small group of residents led by Mr. Hassan's quiet direction began assembling a sturdy temporary wooden ramp at the front steps of the house, ensuring the grandmother could safely get inside her new home that evening. No committees were consulted, no bylaws debated, no aesthetic objections raised. It was simply neighbors seeing a need and meeting it together. It was the antithesis of everything Victoria Sterling had represented. Chloe watched them work, a lump forming in her throat. This spontaneous act of kindness, this simple practical demonstration of support, felt more significant than any legal victory or public vindication. It was the living proof of change. The real victory wasn't just the removal of a tyrant, it was the opening of gates, both literal and figurative. It was the rediscovery that true community isn't built on enforced perfection and exclusion, but on empathy, acceptance, and the willingness to lend a hand. Standing there bathed in the warm glow of the party lights and the quiet satisfaction of her own hard-won peace, Chloe knew their thrilling story had reached its true and lasting resolution. This powerful story reminds us that courage isn't about lacking fear, but acting despite it when facing injustice. Like Chloe meticulously documenting Victoria's escalating harassment, keep detailed records when confronted with unfairness or bullying. Date specifics and evidence empower you and counter attempts to dismiss your reality. Don't underestimate the strength found in unity. Mr. Hassan's decision to share his own documented experiences ignited collective action. Seek allies and build bridges within your community or workplace, as shared voices are significantly harder to ignore than lone whispers. Furthermore, Ellie's journey highlights the importance of using whatever influence or platform you possess ethically, even when it feels complicated or personally costly. True strength lies not in domination, like Victoria's, but in upholding principles and advocating for fairness. Ultimately, the story champions building connections based on empathy and mutual support over rigid control. Cultivate relationships grounded in understanding and assistance, rather than judgment and arbitrary rules. By embracing these lessons, documenting truth-fostering solidarity, acting with integrity, and prioritizing supportive community, you can navigate challenges with greater resilience and contribute to positive change, transforming adversity into an opportunity for profound personal and collective growth.